My life changed on a Friday, just after I'd turned 18 and recently moved into a new life. That's how I like to think of it. After leaving the modest village where I'd grown up, I'd moved to the modest town where I'd be attending community college. I wanted to be a graphic artist or something, I wasn't really sure. But I liked art and I was kind of good at it anyway. So those were the kind of classes I took while I worked part-time at Sears, dressing mannequins and putting up decorations and displays, stuff like that. It wasn't a bad job, even if it only paid for my rent and just enough food to keep me from starving. My parents sent me a little every month and I'd be okay. Except I was lonely. I mean, it was a new town and I didn't really know anyone except my landlady. She was an older woman, divorced, and renting out the small apartment above her garage. It wasn't much, but I could afford it, and the hard part had been convincing her to let me have the place. "You're not a hussy, are you?" she'd asked me, and I'd blinked and reddened and wondered how anyone could be that rude. No, ma'am," I stammered. I've never, I don't." "Humph," she snorted, looking me up and down. I found myself wishing I'd worn something other than my ragged cut-offs and the little pink t-shirt that showed off my belly button. This had been during the summer, though, the dog days of August, and just standing in the shade of her front porch had been hot enough to make me sweat. I sure wasn't going to walk around town dressed in my Sunday best, and it wasn't my fault that I'd grown up to be more than a little attractive to most folks. My landlady, the widow Perkins, was the sort of old woman who found that suspicious, like beautiful was just trouble waiting to happen. "I'm a virgin," I'd confessed later that long afternoon, blushing all the more because a thing like that wasn't anyone's business but my own. "I don't even have a boyfriend anymore." "What happened to him?" the widow asked, peering down her nose with cold grey eyes like I might have buried him in my backyard. "He joined the army," I answered quite truthfully. "They closed the mill and there aren't a lot of jobs back home, so—" "You look like a hussy to me," she declared. "I'm not surprised the boy run off." "I'm sorry, Mum." I looked down and frowned at my rather large, firm breasts, and kicked myself mentally for not wearing a bra at least. "I guess I'll be going and, thank you for the lemonade and everything." "Hold on now, Missy." The old woman had changed her mind, perhaps realizing that I really wasn't any sort of hussy at all, but only a girl fresh out of high school looking for a chance. "Thank you so much." I smiled and signed the simple rental agreement half an hour later, giving Mrs. Perkins very nearly all the cash I'd brought with me. I wouldn't be moving in yet. I'd go back home and get my things first, but I was moving for sure, and I felt pretty nervous and somewhat relieved. "I'll be keeping an eye on you," she warned me, "and you'd best keep an eye on some of the boys around here." "Ma'am?" "You might want to cover yourself up some," the widow said with a cluck of her tongue, looking up and down my long legs, which just as tanned and toned as the rest of me. "Yes, ma'am." I nodded seriously, pulling some blonde hair out of my blue eyes. I won't pretend any false modesty because I know what I look like, but I'd learned to deal with boys and even full-grown men. My old boyfriend, the one in the army, had tried hard and often to get into my panties, but I'd managed to fend him off. A little kissing was nice, and occasionally his hands would wander to find my breasts. But that was as far as we'd gone for the 2 years we'd dated. My sex drive had never been much to brag about, unlike some of the girls I'd known in school. Doing more than kissing just didn't interest me a whole lot, although I'd been sorely tempted to give my boyfriend a little more than that as he'd gotten closer to shipping off for boot camp. I'd ended up giving him a hand job in the back seat of his daddy's car. That had been the first and only time I'd seen an erection in my life, and certainly the only time I'd ever touched one. I hadn't done a very good job of jerking him off, probably, but he hadn't complained, and I did kiss him nice and let him play with my tits through my sweater. When he started coming, it had surprised me, just because I'd had no idea what to expect, really. It had seemed kind of disgusting, and I'd wiped that stuff off my fingers in a hurry. That was the full extent of my sexual expertise as I walked home from work late one Friday evening. "Oh!" I stopped walking as a shadowy figure crossed the sidewalk in front of me. It was a dog, I realized, and a large one too, although I couldn't say for certain what breed it might have been. I'd never owned a dog, but of course I knew people who did and I wasn't afraid of them.